So if you're ready, and I'm certain you are, you ready? A few years ago when I was in Virginia, I had a dream. And in my dream, I was in an old city with large buildings. The city was gray, the sky was gray, and there were no leaves anywhere on the trees. And then all of a sudden, I was about 3 stories up, looking onto the old city streets from a window. And from the opposite side of the street, around the corner of a building, I saw a huge parade coming by. It was coming from around the buildings. And it wasn't an ordinary parade because the parade was made entirely of women. And as the parade came into my view, like that, as it came right into the vision like this, something really beautiful happened. In that gray, gray city, all the buildings started, the sky started, the clouds started dissipating and the sun started shining through. And the trees started growing leaves again. It started getting colorful. And just then another really miraculous thing happened. There was a downpour of whitish fluid, little drops of white fluid about that big, billions upon billions of drops of fluid that would drop down. But they wouldn't drop to the ground. They would drop and stand in midair, bouncing up and down like that, weaving. So I was curious. I took my hand and I went like this in the air. And my whole arm was covered with this substance that I didn't know what it was. To this day, I think of it sort of like manna. For the last few thousand years, our kind has done a lot to repress women, especially men. And some women have even done it to themselves. If the balance is going to be coming back to the earth, I believe that the grandmothers and the women are going to be doing a lot of it. They'll be the number 2 in the corporation doing most of the work, let's put it that way. And in some cases, number 1. But I really think it is the grandmothers that is going to help bring back the balance. So on that note, we'll begin. I don't know whose tea this is. This yours? Thanks. Just so everybody can see, I'll be holding up the cards. The circle. It has no end, and it has no beginning because it simply is. And it's the same thing with you and I and everyone else we've ever known and haven't even met yet. People that aren't even born. We've always existed. And will always continue to exist. There will always be an I, an us, and a we. Far, far back in the global human memory, there's something that is referred to as the light. Different cultures call it different things. In Christianity, of course, we call this light heaven. In my culture, literally translated, it's called the happy hunting grounds. In terms of physics, you could call it the light. But we know from physics that white light doesn't exist. That white light is actually a mixture of 7 colors, visible to our eyes, that come together as one, under one entity. So you could say that heaven is actually made up of 7 heavens coming together. The first heaven, if you want to think of it that way, would be like the red heaven, a very raw, very primal, very driven energy, carnal even. The second heaven would be like the orange, the third one, the yellow, the fourth one, the green, the fifth one, the sixth one, violet. Now there's a 7th heaven, but the 7th heaven really isn't visible to our physical eyes just yet. Hold on to heaven. That 7th heaven, you could call it ultraviolet, if you want to think of it that way. It's a very special, very ethereal part of heaven that isn't easily accessible. It's easily accessible, but let's just say it's got something to do with, it's very special. In the light, you see, there's a reason why we have sayings in our vocabulary like, oh, I'm going to be a star someday, or look at that person. She has fire burning in her eyes. I'd sure like to talk to that person. I'd sure like to talk to that. Maybe near the bottom of the cards, but I think it'll die down as we go. I'd sure like to and you get a sneak preview of some of the cards. I'd sure like to talk to that person and spark up a conversation. And why do doctors use defibrillators? To put spark, energy, electricity back into our bodies when we have a stroke. Oh man, I have a lot of energy, I'm all fired up. So there's a reason why we have sayings like that in vocabulary. We are fire, we are light, we are electricity, and we're eternal. Because fire, light itself, photons, never die out. You can smash them together and create neutrinos out of them. But even the neutrinos, even though they die instantly, ones right after that take their place. We're eternal. The light within these spotlights appears as a spotlight only because it's got a container made out of glass. We see a light bulb. In the light, that state called heaven, or the light, there's no limits in how spirits can appear. Wherever your mind takes you is where your body and reality follows. If a spirit wants to appear as a mighty eagle flying across the horizon, you can do that. You can appear as a Mustang horse running across a beach. You can appear as a really tall person. You can appear like as a little person running around in the forest. You can appear as a dwarf, a leprechaun. You can appear translucent, opaque. You can appear as fire, water. There's no, wherever your mind takes you, in that state, in that heaven state, is where your body goes. Because the mind has no limits. Why do we change our clothing? We want to appear different from day to day. Otherwise, we'd wear the same clothing 365 days a year for the rest of our lives. It's a remnant memory of our shape-shifting abilities. Originally, prior to taking our current physical form, we were shapeshifters. And some people can still do that today. Some people have different intents when they do it, but it's still a capability. Because the photons are always mixing with each other, the smallest particles of light, there's a mixing of energies that goes on within that heaven. And this mixing of energies is what creates that great oneness that we feel whenever we die and get back into the light. It washes all of our humanity away. And we can feel that oneness. We can look another person in the eye and say, I love you, and mean it. Even a complete stranger. But in that light, there's no strangers because there's no secrets. We are them, they are us at the same time. Although there's personal identity, but there's a collective identity as well. On a mental level, we're at one with all the thoughts from the other beings surrounding us. Every thought that a person thinks or a spirit thinks is what every other spirit can think if they choose to resonate to that level, to that frequency. The same thing with emotions. Take all the love that you have for your family, your mother, your father, your sisters, your brothers, your cousins, a friend, a dear, dear friend that you have, your lover, your spouse, whoever you happen to love the most. And add to that love all the love contained for all those other beings from another person sitting beside you, and so on. And add that up. And eventually, you'll come to 6.2 billion forms of collective love like that. And that's still not even a fraction of the type of love that you feel when you're up in that light. It's like being with your mother, your father, your best friend, your lover, all at once. It came to the point eventually where our love for one another got to be so strong, so condensed, that it started pulsating like a heartbeat, like a star. And eventually it got to be so condensed, our love for one another got to be so, almost like a love-making session. You can think of it in those terms, literally. That love came to be so strong, so condensed, that eventually there was no way for this love to be released but outwards. Creating one of those portions, creating the last of what astrophysicists speak today as when they say supernovas, the Big Bang. When we look at the cosmos at night, we're seeing relations. There's no such thing as aliens, my friends. That's family out there. Direct family with us. Some of them may not be as evolved because maybe they have their own time schedules there, but they're still family. There's ones that love us dearly, and there's ones that need to be reminded of that love. But there's love binding the universe. If love didn't exist throughout the universe would fall apart. And yet it continues to expand, shrink in some parts, expand in others. New elements are created. Love governs the cosmos. Over a certain period, we started condensing with one another and forming little families. In that original circle of life, sorry, I'll show you this too. There's 3 elements that come together within that circle of life. And remember, this is just an interpretation. You can think of these elements as being like electricity, because the cosmos itself is electrical. You could think of the first element as being like the A, or the 1, the positive wire found in electricity. The yin, the masculine. The B, the 2, is kind of like the receiving wire, female wire. Those 2 negative entities, when they come together in love like that, they create a third entity that's created between them, and it bonds them. They create a family together. That little child, that little baby that's created from their unity between male and female, creates a third entity called the C, or the 3. We have different names for this now. They call it Christ. In my culture, we call it the spirit that lives in all things. Ka. In the movie Star Wars, they call it the Force. So when they're talking about the Force, something that binds everything and everyone within the element, within the universe itself, it's like a giant spider web. Whatever shakes one element of the web, if you're connected to that universe-wide web, you know what's going on. Same thing like Christ. Christ is not a person. Christ is a title. Jesus was a man. But anybody can assume that Christhood if they tune in with the natural energies of the earth and themselves. They take off their masks and they let their own true self flow forth. You become like this. It takes time for some of us, and it's going to take me a while. But we'll all get there, for sure. This is the first time that I've presented outside like this. Usually it's inside, but I'm always up to a challenge. Well, after the last one of the Big Bangs, for every action there's a reaction. So whatever expands must sometime contract. So we gathered with one another over time, started forming little families, light families, little solar systems, our homes, until we go back into the original source. Our original home here was a little bit different than how we see it today. A long, long time ago, surrounding this planet, there wasn't just one sun, there was 2 suns. And their relationship with one another was like 2 brothers, at peace with one another. And the spirits living within that light, they became curious. We became curious as spiritual beings. We asked ourselves, what would it be like to experience living in a physical or semi-physical body? We started wondering what it would be like to have access to the 5 physical senses of the flesh: sight, taste, hearing, smell, touch. 5 fingers, 5 senses. But there was a catch. Because our original Earth was in between both of these suns along with the other planets, gravitational energy wasn't as strong on her as it is now. So in other words, there was no need for her to become a physical place. It even says so in the Bible. She was void upon the face of the deep, like a big, giant, gaseous ball of energy, of gas, but still alive. On Mother Earth still lived. When we started getting curious about living in a physical body, we knew that a physical place to experience those senses had to be created. And the Earth wasn't yet physical. So we thought, we have the powers of co-creating, don't we? We may not be the creator, but we're co-creators. Let's use those powers, we thought to ourselves. So by some mysterious method, we took one of those suns and we put it to rest by extinguishing it. It either happened like this, or it simply got suffocated. But the remaining sun, what happened was that when one sun took off, the Earth was now sent into a wobbly spin around the remaining star, forcing her to become physical, using gravitational energy. And so this was the birth of the 4 directions: North Pole, South Pole, East, West directions. It was also the beginning of time, to our perspective here, because time can only be measured by light and dark. Springtime, fall time, summertime, wintertime, daytime, nighttime. Everything revolves, when you speak about time, around revolution of the Earth around the sun. It was also the beginning of the 4 elements: earth, air, water, and fire, because now the Earth was spinning on her own axis. So gravitational energy, she started burning from within with the same fire that her lover, the sun, started burning with. Earth started forming, air, all sorts of neat things. So we're pretty good. We managed to create our cake. Now we had to find a way to eat it at the same time. Coming here to Earth for the first time was kind of like being on a honeymoon with billions of other souls, because really we're already married with one another. I'm sure a lot of us here are single. We might be divorced, might be married, might be bachelors, bachelorettes. Some of you may not even be thinking about marriage yet, but we're still intermarried with one another. We're lovers in a spiritual sense. And that time of unity will happen again in a distant future. But back then, coming here to Earth for the first time was like coming to a honeymoon suite. Now when you get married and you're looking for a honeymoon spot, you want it to be the best possible spot. You're going to tell that hotel manager, I want this in there, I want that, I want that, I want that, I want that for that price. Because, hey, it's our honeymoon. I want to make sure we're getting our money's worth. So we decided to make this place a beautiful place, with animals, beasts that polluted the skies, the waters, the lands. Everywhere you looked, there was something alive to look at. It's not so true anymore. Now you really have to look hard sometimes to find another beast to interact with. But back then, it was phenomenal, the amount of wildlife that existed here. It's not that we're better than these creatures, but as co-creators, we took their spiritual blueprint, their architectural blueprint in that state of the light, and we downloaded them into this state, like a software program. You download it into this state and you help. But it took time. It wasn't instantaneous. It didn't happen in 7 days. Because this was our first try at some of these abilities. It took time. We started real small, tiny little things, little microbial organisms. And as our creative abilities flourished, eventually these beings got a little bit bigger, more complex, more varied in their behavior, their living environments, until they surrounded the Earth. One of the other things is that we knew that when we were going to be living in a physical body, we knew that we had to have physical food to eat. Now here's the catch. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit more about this. When you create something, it takes time for an idea to evolve. And in order for an idea to evolve, Every instant of that moment you're thinking about that idea, you're creating something. Evolution and creation are flip sides of the same coin. There's no conflict between the two. We knew that some of the foods to have with us on a honeymoon trip. See, the challenge was, we asked ourselves, what kind of foods are we going to be able to eat that won't necessitate the killing of life, the shedding of blood? Because back then, blood didn't feed life, life fed life itself. Some of those foods for us to eat back then, when we first stepped onto the earth, were foods that resembled very closely today's fruit and nuts. For the reason being that when you pick a fruit or a nut off a tree, just like how it says in Genesis, that the tree goes on living, nothing dies. As a matter of fact, when the tree's ripen up with its fruit, the fruit drops by itself. It gives itself to you. I've yet to see an animal purposely jump into an arrow or a bullet. The other reason for foods like this, and this kind of makes people uncomfortable, and I'm going to say it anyway, is because think of all the sayings and songs that have been sung about fruit and nuts over the years, and you'll quickly realize why these are some of the best foods to have with you on a honeymoon. I found my thrill on Blueberry Hill. Peaches and cream. Strawberry fields forever. Think about chocolate bars now, thinking about nuts. Oh, Henry. Mr. Big. Nut milk. You could go on and on and on with these examples. I won't, but you know, it's there. There's an erotic appeal to these foods. They're sensual. And nothing has to die in order for us to eat them. And this is a hunter. I'm a hunter. So this, it's kind of hard for me to accept at first, but oh well. Step number 2 in becoming physical beings was that before actually getting into the earth, we scouted it out. We had recon. Groups of recon teams went out and they scouted out the earth. We did. And we retained all the shape-shifting abilities that we had back in the light, here on earth. Just like Einstein says, if you have 100% of your brain operating, there's no need for you to have a physical body. There might be a want for one, and you might create one, but there's no need for one. You can recreate your body at any moment given in time and appear in any way that you want. So we could appear like little guys with big heads and big buggy eyes. We could appear like 8 or 9 foot tall guys with really big feet. We could even appear as floating spheres of light. Floating saucer-shaped objects. There was no limits. Wherever the mind took you is where your reality and your body followed. Space travel existed back then too. We were Star Trekkers long before the popular television series ever came out. The only thing is that back then, star travel was like this. It wasn't 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Can't even get past, what is it now, Mars? Or what's the farthest planet we've reached with even droids and Saturn? Yeah, we can't even get out of our own solar system yet. And it's, well, yeah, good in a way, but it's also frustrating in a way because we're curious. We know we're not alone. Instinctively, it's driving us to find out who's out there with us. What the hell is out there when we look out into that blackness, that void? We know there's people out there. We're hungry for family. It's like thousands of years ago when global telecommunications worked a little bit differently than how it does today. People were happy traveling from place to place, nomadic, or settled in one spot. And when you encountered different people with different skin, it was a real thrill. You know? Scary in some respects because you were wondering what they were all about. But it was a real thrill anyway. Now we've become a global community. We know what every race in the world looks like. We know what the Chinese look like, the Japanese, the black, the white, the Caucasian, the Indian, I should say First Nations. We know what every race looks like. We're hungry for out there now. Back then, in order to space travel, all you really had to do, if you wanted to explore outer space, go opposite. Go into inner space. Take a deep breath. When you're operating 100% brain potential like you were back then, and something came in, and I don't want to say abduct, but it took you. It took you places. If Spirit said, I'll take you here, in an instant, you found yourself on a different galaxy, in a different star, whatever. It was that fast. There was no secrets. Step number 3, and the final step in becoming physical, was when we decided to take the 4 elements of earth, air, water, and fire in unique combinations to form a little puppet, so to speak, or a vehicle, like a limousine, that the spirit could enter through and live through. Also, when we came in from the light, when we came into the earth, we brought the light with us and in us, because it is us. And we placed it in a very strategic spot along our bodies, like a battery. Rising scale of energy. You got the lower, the primal, very creative side. You have the very ethereal, spiritual up at the, and they work as a whole. The whole person is one that is very sexual, or sexual through creativity. Creates paintings, poetry, art, channels it, because it's a very strong force. Sometimes there's other ways to express it, and we all know what that is. But there's also a very creative aspect as well. And the higher up you go, the more in tune you become with all around. Besides the 5 senses of the flesh that we wanted to experience when we first came here to Earth, there was a 6th sense that had to be created. Like a modem connecting a computer to the internet. As long as that modem is operating, you can connect with other computers, other people, other spirits, other entities. But when that modem is closed, when the mind's eye is shut down for some reason, either through fear, denial, guilt, space communication isn't so longer so easy. It shuts down. So those 4 elements live inside us. We have earth, of course, because, hey, you're a physical being. I can touch you. And we have water because when we move, our movements are fluid. We have air because when we're born, what does a doctor do? And we have fire. That fire that we had in the teepee last night, that same fire lives within us, 98.6 degrees. It also lives in cold-blooded creatures, because obviously they're not ice. They got to have some warmth in them as well. So it lives in everything. So it's kind of like the relationship between a puppeteer and the puppet. Or you could say like a backseat boss with the chauffeur of the limousine being the physical body. And the backseat boss being like the spirit, giving directions to the guy up front or the woman up front driving the car, our conscious minds. So, imagine this. Imagine your first excursion to Earth as a spirit living within a physical or a semi-physical body. What was our physical state like back then? Well, you could think of it sort of like being in different states of water. When water is in a vaporous state, you can't see it unless you see clouds. You know that there's humidity in the air, and you know that water's there, but you can't see it. That's what our spiritual nature is like. It's all around us. There's spirits right now observing us, what we're doing here right now. They're watching us. I think we can see that right now. Right now, we're like ice. You can't change the shape of ice unless you thaw out the water and give it a different mold. Ice stays the way it is. We know that we're able to shapeshift. It's a distant memory. We change clothes every day. We change our appearance. Oh, I don't like my hair like that. I want my hair a different way. Or I think of cosmetic surgery. Remnant memories. We were able to shapeshift, change our appearance. So what was our original state like back then? It was more like water. Water, when you hold it in your hand, you can feel it. It's physical. And yet at the same time, you can't grasp it. It's spiritual. It's both at the same time. It can become more like ice, more physical. It can become more like vapor, more ethereal. That was one of the beauty of our powers back then. So imagine being able to shapeshift and appear in any way that you want. Okay, whether you want to appear like, I don't know, you can name some celebrities or something like that if your mind leads that way. Think of superhuman strength. Just think of superhuman strength. Did another card blow off too? Thanks. Actually, this is the card I was going to show anyway. Think of superhuman strength and the ability to go from 0 to 60 in the blink of an eye. Those are the kind of abilities that we had back then. Amazing abilities. So how in the heck did we become like how we are today? Because what is the reality today? The reality is today is that we know we're a family, a global family, but we still have issues with one another, even with ourselves. We love and hate at the same time. But we tend to move towards love because we're still having communication with each other, even when it's through war. My kind, men, when we express emotions for one another, it often isn't with a hug, it's more like with a handshake or a slap on the back. We have a masculine way of showing our emotion with one another. So where did the problems begin? This little guy right here pretty much puts it in a nutshell. There's a few different things you can do with an apple. The first thing you can do with an apple is you can simply exist with it. No problem. The sky hasn't fallen on our heads. The second thing you can do with an apple is you can look at it. And I mean really look at it. Admire the curves, the shape. It looks inviting. It's a sensual looking fruit. The third thing you can do with an apple is you can, if you have its permission, is you can pick it up. You can caress it and feel it. Its skin rubbing against your skin feels good. We have crystals inside our bodies in terms of the elements. When you rub crystals together, you generate a piezo, I'm hoping I'm saying this right, is it a piezoelectrical effect? Piezo? Okay, I always mispronounce that word. Thank you. Piezoelectrical effect, when you rub two crystals together like that, it generates a form of electricity. What do you feel when you're in love and you're kissing someone for the very first time? Tell me, yeah, you feel charged, you feel electrical, you feel fired up, you feel more alive. Now the fourth thing you can do with an apple, after you've gone through those preliminary steps, some people don't, but that's their business, is you can take a bite of it. It's not forbidden. This is why the apple was made. Nothing forbidden about it at all. That's a good apple. But it was chosen as the forbidden fruit for a very good reason. If you cut the apple in a certain direction, perfect. You can see that the way the apple is made makes perfect sense why they chose to put it in the Bible and other texts of the world, because the Bible isn't the only text that has the apple within it. The apple is the near perfect representation of what we now call, in medical terms, the hermaphroditic human reproductive system. Does everybody know what hermaphrodite is? No. A hermaphrodite is a person, a human being, born with both sets of genitalia at the same time. They have both a penis and a vagina. Now think of what kind of confusion that must make for them when they have to conform to our standards. But what makes a man and a woman a woman? But these people are born with both. And I lost what I was trying to see here to dig it out of this one. Surgery. The reason why they chose this as the apple, if you look at the apple, the symbology is perfect. The stem represents the penis through which flows the sap or the nectar, the sperm, that contains all of the genetic material in its chromosomes and DNA that the seed of man, or the seed of the apple contains, that when you put that little seed, this tiny little fragment of what this is, and the tree, into another fertile womb, the core of the apple representing the vagina, or the heart of Mother Earth, into her reproductive organ, which is the earth itself. The earth is a sexual being. Sorry if this sounds as a shock, but that's the truth. She's a highly sensually charged being. We've alienated ourselves from that. This little seed contains all the genetic material that eventually takes root, forms a little sapling, a shoot first, and then a sapling, and then eventually a large tree. That big tree, you can take other fruit from that and pick, and the circle goes on and on and on. Where the problems began for us when we had all that freedom, it's like the wind has died down too, was when one bite no longer sufficed. When one bite that gave us loads of pleasure, when we were sharing ourselves with one another, automatically had to have a bigger bite in order to have the same levels of satisfaction, like a drug.